Only God's plan for salvation will work. Holding grievances is an attack on God's plan for salvation. Thank you all so much for joining me here today on Tuesday, March the 26th of 2024. Lesson 86 in A Course in Miracles, published by Foundation for Inner Peace. Last year we went through the original edition. This year we're going through the Foundation for Inner Peace edition. Lesson 86. These ideas are for review today. Only God's plan for salvation will work. It is senseless for me to search wildly about for salvation. I've seen it in many people and in many things, but when I reached for it, it was not there. I was mistaken about where it is. I was mistaken about what it is. I will undertake no more idle seeking. Only God's plan for salvation will work, and I will rejoice because His plan can never fail. These are some suggested forms for applying this idea specifically. So if you're tempted to resort to an alternative to God's joy, here's some things you might say. God's plan for salvation will save me from my perception of this. Now we're working with our perceptions. And God's plan for salvation will save me from my perception of this. Or you might say to yourself if you're tempted, this is no exception in God's plan for my salvation. Or you might say, let me perceive this only in the light of God's plan for salvation, and then dismiss whatever's tempting you to resort to something other than wholehearted joy. That's God's plan, that you're the light of the world, and you stay there by practicing forgiveness, letting go of what is not real. And then our review for our afternoon review, that was the morning review. Our afternoon review is holding grievances is an attack on God's plan for salvation. I say afternoon. If you start your lesson in the afternoon, well then you do the first one in the morning, or in the latter part of the day. It depends on when you start. So anyway. Holding grievances is an attack on God's plan for salvation. Holding grievances is an attempt to prove that God's plan for salvation will not work. You want to prove that God's plan doesn't work and that you can't be joyful, cheerful always? Well, then hold some grievances. Holding grievances is an attempt to prove that God's plan for salvation will not work. Yet only His plan will work. By holding grievances, I am therefore excluding my only hope of salvation from my awareness. I would no longer defeat my own best interests in this insane way. I would accept God's plan for salvation and be happy. Specific applications for this idea might be in these forms. I'm choosing between misperception and salvation as I look on this. So if you're seeing something that's kind of making you irritated, any kind of a loss of peace or joy, that's a grievance you're holding. And it's something you're perceiving that's contrary to the way that God created the world and you and everyone in it. I'm choosing between misperception and salvation as I look on this. Or you might say, if I see grounds for grievances in this, I will not see the grounds for my salvation. And let's change the word salvation to happiness. Let me read it again. If I see grounds for grievances in this, I will not see the grounds for my happiness, or for my cheerfulness, or for my permanent peace. So let's let go of grievances, because they're an attack on God's plan for salvation. Or if something else tempts you, you might say, this calls for salvation, not attack. God save me from my perceptions. Can you be quick to ask? Because he always answers that prayer. He always answers every prayer. Prayers of the heart. Doesn't matter what you're saying, it's what you're feeling is what he answers. Okay, let's go take a look in our text reading, The Idols of Sickness, and we're going to finish chapter 10 today. We're in chapter 10, The Idols of Sickness. We're ready to start in section, well, we've already started. We're ready for paragraph 8 in section 10, The Denial of God. Remember, we're learning about blasphemy is to deny what God created. To believe in a grievance, that'd be blasphemy. That's a denial of God. Okay, and what's going on around the world today? And a couple of things I did not tell you about yesterday and the day before. Day before was actually Purim, which is the Jewish holiday celebrating the saving of the people of the Jewish people during Esther's time. You can read about it in the book of Esther. Purim. And then yesterday, I should have told you about it's Holi, spelled H-O-L-I. It's a Hindu festival. It's the last full moon of the Hindu year, also known as the end of winter celebration. Today, American Diabetes Association Alert Day, Holy Tuesday, spelled with a Y. It's the week before Easter. Holy Tuesday, Legal Assistance Day, Live Long and Prosper. That's Leonard Nimoy was born on this day in 1931. Spock, the cranial, very logical thinker. He died in 2015. National Nougat Day. Prince Jonah Kuio Kalanianaol Day, which I'm sure I'm not pronouncing it properly. He was born in 1871 on this day, died in 1922, and he was one of the last kings of Hawaii before some American and European men overthrew their kingdom in 1893. Can we use aloha for peace? I should have looked it up, but I bet you, it means blessings and delight. It's what peace is all about. So let's use aloha today, since it's Prince Jonah Kuio Kalanianaol Day. And then, so Aloha Day, we'll say aloha is our word for peace. Let's see, what else do we have? Purple Day, which is Epilepsy Day. Solitude Day. Solitude Day, a day to be quiet and still and enter into your inner world. You need to have a little of that every day, if not a whole day of it. We usually, around our family, we consider December the 6th to be a solitude day. We call it Silent Day. It's the day that the mother of my children, my first wife, was killed in a car wreck in 1992. 6 children and I, and the oldest one was 10 years old. The youngest one was 10 months old, and I got to become an immediate Mr. Mom. And the first celebration I started was that next year on December the 6th. I said, we're going to have a silent day today in remembrance of the Diane, Carol and Diane Perkins was her name. Let's see, Spinach Day, Spinacia oleracea, and it's certainly time to plant spinach. You can plant it as early as March here in the Ozarks, March 1st. So get your spinach in. And let's see, I think that's everything going on. Then we got out of edible landscaping, we have the double gold raspberry. So let's see what Edible says about edible double gold raspberry. Double gold raspberry is a flavorful raspberry, vigorous and disease resistant. Double gold produces a deeply blushed golden champagne colored fruit with a distinctive conical shape. The double in its name is for its 2 harvests per season. The first year of planting, the initial crop is produced in the fall on the tips of current year's canes, and a second crop is produced further down the same canes the following summer. In taste tests, double gold has been a favorite. Fruit is too delicate for long-distance shipping, therefore a good choice for home gardeners. Double gold is resistant to Phytophthora root rot, as well as most of the common leaf diseases. Zones 5 through 8 space 5-foot circles or 3 foot apart in 5-foot wide beds. And then out of our Permaculture for Beginners by Carrie Mitchell, we're still in Chapter 5, Plant Placement. Soil type. Soil type is paramount for plant health. If you pick a location based on previously discussed considerations such as light and moisture, etc., you may find the soil on that site will not support your plant. Like it might be not an acidic site. You could amend that soil. But she makes this qualification. Modifying the soil can and should be considered, but you'd want to work with nature, not against it, when amending soil for specific plants. She cautions that you can, spend so much time amending your soil and getting it just right, and you're changing it so far from what's naturally there that you would have been better off just to have planted something else. So keep that in mind. Don't work against nature is the whole permaculture principle, okay? Okay, paragraph 8 in chapter 10, The Idols of Sickness, section 10, The Denial of God. Do not look to the God of sickness for healing, but only to the God of love. For healing is the acknowledgement of Him. When you acknowledge Him, you will know that He has never ceased to acknowledge you, and that in His acknowledgement of you lies your being. You are not sick, and you cannot die. But you can confuse yourself with things that do. Remember, though, that to do this is blasphemy. And for it means that you are looking without love on God and His creation, for which He cannot be separated. Paragraph 9. And we read that yesterday, paragraph 8. Now read it for 9. Only the eternal can be loved, for love does not die. Only the eternal can be loved, for love cannot die. What is of God is His forever, and you are of God. Would He allow Himself to suffer? And would He offer His Son anything that is not acceptable to Him? If you will accept yourself as God created you, you will be incapable of suffering. Yet to do this, you must acknowledge Him as your Creator. This is not because you will be punished otherwise. It is merely because your acknowledgement of your Father is the acknowledgement of yourself as you are. Your Father created you wholly without sin, wholly without pain, and wholly without suffering of any kind. If you deny Him, you bring sin, pain, and suffering into your own mind because of the power He gave it. Your mind is capable of creating worlds, but it can also deny what it creates because it is free. 10. You do not realize how much you have denied yourself and how much God in His love would not have it so. We don't even know how much we've denied ourselves. We think everything's just hunky-dory. We don't realize that we could be creating worlds, and we actually are. And we're asleep in one of the worlds we created. Or maybe I should say one of the worlds we made. We reserve the word create in A Course in Miracles for what was created by God. And what we make is kind of in the image of God, in the sense that we make after, he is the prime creator, and we also can create. But if we do it with blasphemous thoughts, or thoughts that deny God, thoughts born out of grievances, then we end up making a nightmare. But we make a world that's not in alignment with reality or with God. So we use the word make for what the ego produces, and create for what God produces. How much do you realize? You do not realize how much you have denied yourself, and how much God in His love would not have it so. Yet He would not interfere with you, because He would not know His Son if He were not free. To interfere with you would be to attack Himself, and God is not insane. When you deny Him, you are insane. Would you have Him share your insanity? God will never cease to love His Son, and His Son will never cease to love Him. That was the condition of His Son's creation, fixed forever in the mind of God. To know that is insanity. To deny it is sanity. Let's read that again. God will never cease to love His Son, and His Son will never cease to love Him. That was the condition of His Son's creation, fixed forever in the mind of God. To know that is sanity. To deny it is insanity. God gave Himself to you in your creation, and His gifts are eternal. Would you deny yourself to Him? 11. Out of your gifts to Him, the kingdom will be restored to His Son. The Son removed Himself from His gift by refusing to accept what had been created for Him, and what He had created in the name of His Father. Heaven waits for His return, for it was created as the dwelling place of God's Son. Heaven was the dwelling place of God's Son. You are not at home anywhere else, or in any other condition other than in heaven. And you don't have to die to get to heaven. Do not deny yourself the joy that was created for you, for the misery you have made for yourself. God has given you the means for undoing what you have made. Listen, and you will learn how to remember what you are. Are we listening? He says, listen, and you will learn how to remember what you are. 12. If God knows His children as wholly sinless, it is blasphemous to perceive them as guilty. If God knows His children as wholly without pain, it is blasphemous to perceive suffering anywhere. Well, He's raising the standard here of what we perceive, huh? So keep that in mind when you're doing your lessons and asking God to show you a new perception. Let me read it again. If God knows His children as wholly sinless, it is blasphemous to perceive them as guilty. If God knows His children as wholly without pain, it is blasphemous to perceive suffering anywhere. If God knows His children to be wholly joyous, it is blasphemous to feel depressed. Oh my! All of these illusions and the many other forms that blasphemy may take are refusals to accept creation as it is. If God created His Son perfect, that is how you must learn to see Him, to learn of His reality. And as part of the sonship, that is how you must see yourself, to learn of yours. Wow. If God created His Son perfect, that is how you must learn to see Him, to learn of His reality. See yourself as perfect. And as part of the sonship, that is how you must see yourself, to learn of yours. 13. Do not perceive anything God did not create, or you are denying Him. He is the only fatherhood, and it is yours only because He has given it to you. Your gifts to yourself are meaningless, but your gifts to your creations are like His, because they are given in His name. That is why your creations are as real as His. Yet the real fatherhood must be acknowledged if the real son is to be known. You believe that the sick things you have made are your real creations, because you believe that the sick images you perceive are the sons of God. Only if you accept the fatherhood of God will you have anything, because His Father gave you everything. That is why to deny Him is to deny yourself. And the last paragraph, 14. Arrogance is the denial of love, because love shares and arrogance withholds. As long as both appear to you to be desirable, the concept of choice, which is not of God, will remain with you. While this is not true in eternity, it is true in time, so that while time lasts in your mind, there will be choices. Time itself is your choice. If you would remember eternity, you must look only on the eternal. If you allow yourself to become preoccupied with the temporal, you're living in time. Let's read that again. If you would remember eternity, you must look only on the eternal. If you allow yourself to become preoccupied with the temporal, you're living in time. As always, your choice is determined by what you value. What do you value? That's what you're praying for. That's what your heart's aching for, is what you value. As always, your choice is determined by what you value. Maybe I shouldn't use the word aching. Aching, your heart's aching for something. If it can't get it, the heart can be following both, or maybe I should say your perceptual qualities can value what's not real, and you'll ache to get it, even though it would hurt you to have it. But your heart can also lead you in the ways of aloha, of peace, and of joy. As always, your choice is determined by what you value. Time and eternity cannot both be real, because they contradict each other. If you will accept only what is timeless as real, you will begin to understand eternity and make it yours. Wow, let's do that. Let's read it again. If you will accept only what is timeless as real, you will begin to understand eternity and make it yours, and you won't have to die to get there. Okay, lesson 86, only God's plan for salvation will work. It is senseless for me to search wildly about for salvation. I've seen it in many people and in many things, but when I reached for it, it was not there. I was mistaken about where it is. I was mistaken about what it is. I will undertake no more idle seeking. Only God's plan for salvation will work, and I will rejoice because His plan can never fail. These are some specific suggestions for applying this idea. God's plan for salvation will save me from my perception of this. This is no exception in God's plan for my salvation. Let me perceive this only in the light of God's plan for salvation. And then our review of Lesson 72. Holding grievances is an attack on God's plan for salvation. Holding grievances is an attempt to prove that God's plan for salvation will not work, yet only His plan will work. By holding grievances, I am therefore excluding my only hope of salvation from my awareness. I would no longer defeat my own best interests in this insane way. I would accept God's plan for salvation and be happy. Specific applications for this idea, if you're tempted, you might say, I'm choosing between misperception and salvation as I look on this. Or you might say, if I see grounds for grievances in this, I will not see the grounds for my happiness or my salvation. Or you might say, this calls for salvation, not attack. Okay, only God's plan for salvation will work. Holding grievances is an attack on God's plan for salvation. salvation will work, will work. Holding grievances is an attack on God's plan for salvation. Only God's plan for salvation will work, will work. Holding grievances is an attack on God's plan for salvation. Only God's plan for salvation will work, will work. Holding grievances is an attack on God's plan for salvation. I think I did my rhythm a little better than last year when I did that song. Only God's plan for salvation will work. Holding grievances is an attack on God's plan for salvation. And peace be with you. Aloha.